Issue 3 of Fantastic Four Volume 3 opens at Pier 4, where we find Sue, Ben, and Johnny dressed to the nines and standing outside of Reed's lab. Ben is uncomfortable in his tux, but it's really Reed who worries Sue. If they don't get him out of his lab soon, they're going to miss the New Year's Eve charity benefit that they're promised to. Ben knows how to handle this. He wedges his hands into the door of the lab and pulls, shoving them open. What they find inside horrifies them. The iconoclast is stretched out on a table, his body held open by Reed's devices. Reed turns, a high-tech scalpel in one hand, an organ in the other, and a smile on his face. Is this about the benefit? My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 12.2, Harsh Lessons. While Sue and Johnny hold back horrified, Ben can't stop himself. How could Reed do this? Tracking the iconoclast down is one thing, but dissecting him? What is wrong with him? Reed pauses and then laughs. This isn't really the iconoclast. This is a holographic endoplasty. Clearly, how could you mistake the two? The team is still rather unsettled, but they do calm down slightly. Reed explains further. Reed's sensors were able to extrapolate and build a holographic model based upon the data that those sensors gathered on the iconoclast during his attack. Doing so has revealed a rather strange find, that the iconoclast is single-celled. Sue finds that hard to believe. He was, quote, some sort of paradimensional amoeba, end quote? And Reed says, yeah, sort of, basically. He still has to analyze the genetic strands that the iconoclast left behind on objects that he touched, but once he does, he'll have a better understanding of all of it. That is why he's been so focused in the lab. That sounds like a solid plan, but that also sounds like it's going to take hours. Sue isn't convinced that Reed will actually attend the benefit. Reed assures her that he will, though. He has his tux ready to go, even now. Once he finishes these studies, he'll suit up and meet them there. The other three are understandably nervous about this plan. This would not be the first gala that Reed misses due to the distractive nature of science. But they head out, Reed promising to be close behind them. Out of the entire Fantastic Four, Reed has felt the least developed in our past two issues. It's not that he has been poorly written, but that he hasn't really done anything of note. Reed has experimented and ignored his family, which is classic Reed, but that is only a facet of his character. The clear focus on him here at the start of this issue is a welcome one, as it signals a bit more of a spotlight on Reed, even if only for an issue. The fake-out with the iconoclast's hologram is a pretty good one. Our first issue was explicitly about science being done without morals, and our second issue established that Reed doesn't really think about his family's needs or wants before acting, as shown by their move into the pier. This makes it feel plausible that Reed could become so lost in his search for discovery that he would dissect a potential threat. I don't know what to make of the revelation that the iconoclast was single-celled, but that is a strange, interesting idea. We then move to outer space, where we find the former Herald of Galactus, the Silver Surfer, and Alicia Masters. Alicia calls for the Surfer's attention, his mind having wandered back to Earth. Ever since the heroes returned to Earth, and the Fantastic Four specifically, he has found himself thinking of the planet. Given the Surfer's connection to the power cosmic, perhaps he senses that something is wrong, Alicia suggests. Just because no one, including Ben, has reached out to them doesn't mean that they can't contact Earth. The Surfer hesitates. He and Alicia have grown closer as of late, and he's reluctant to lose her to Ben. He does ultimately agree, though, and then pain stabs at his mind, almost causing him to double over. He can feel that something is growing inside of Earth, and it threatens the entire planet. This right here is a really good example of an A-plot, B-plot, C-plot setup. In issue 2, Lobdell did a single-page setup for the Super Apes, which was the B-plot of that issue. Ben, pining for Alicia, was the C-plot, while the A-plot was the Iconoclast's attack. Here in issue 3, the Super Apes have been moved from a B to an A-plot, and so Alicia's plot moves up to the B-plot to be addressed in the next issue. She might not be our focus now, but her plotline is closing in fast. I also love the flippin' look of the Surfer here. Davis, Farmer, and Liquid are an incredible team in general, but the Surfer is smooth and reflective with lots of nice shading and highlights on him. Back on Earth, we return to Empire State University. Kathy Palumbo, who we met last issue, remember, is burning the midnight oil as she works towards her doctorate in animal pathology. She pauses as the slide that she's examining has something strange about it. It's as if the monkey's own blood was producing the virus that plagues it. Unsure of what that means, Kathy calls her consulting professor and leaves a message. She does not, however, get to finish her message. We see the monkey inside of its cage watching her, cursing her. In one panel, the camera moves away from Kathy, and the cage behind her as she checks the time. When the camera moves back, the cage is now open, and the monkey is gone. Behind Kathy, a threatening voice tells her to put down the phone. She turns and recognizes Dr. Ivan Kragoff, the Red Ghost. Ivan is an older man, in his 60s perhaps, with white hair. He's bald on top, but he has a ring of hair that goes from ear to ear, and that hair hangs down to his shoulders. He's dressed in a red jumpsuit, with leather gloves, boots, and fur around his neck. He stares at her blankly, though, with his shoulders rolled forward like a gorilla. Surrounding him are his super apes, an orangutan named Miklo, a gorilla named Petor, and a baboon named Igor, who introduce themselves. Kragoff was a Russian cosmonaut once, and he flew into space in order to expose himself and his apes to cosmic radiation, as the Fantastic Four once did. He is clearly not the man in charge here, though. Igor explains that the apes were hoping to keep their presence here a secret before their final contamination, but Kathy has now ruined that. 2 of the apes close in on her, while the third hangs up the phone. I love the horror movie vibe that the creative team has going on here. First, we caught Reed dissecting a guy, now we have apes haunting ESU at night. I won't lie though, I can't take villainous monkeys or apes seriously, so I mostly just chuckle at this scene, despite how well executed it is. Lobdell hints that something is off between Kragoff and his apes as he just grunts, where normally he's a pretty decent monologuer. Davis accentuates this with his blank facial expression and his hunched-over body language. These two are a good combo. I hope that they enjoyed working together. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with Kathy's revelation that the baboon's blood is producing a virus that plagues it. We were shown last issue that the monkey is sick, or is at least faking being sick. But this doesn't get explained. Is this baboon controlling its own blood, creating a virus so that it gets sick? The baboon wanting to be in ESU's science lab makes sense, given where the rest of the issue goes, but can a super ape control its own blood like that? The way that Lobdell has this line set up as the reason to contact Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four should mean that it's a big deal, that it is important, and that it should matter to our narrative. But I don't think that it actually does. At Pier 4, the Fantastic Four's robot, I hesitate to say servant, but I guess that's what Herbie is. Herbie is a small, torso-tall robot who floats in the air. Herbie generally watches Franklin, but here he serves as a living alarm clock for Reed. He is due at the gala. Of course, Reed is lost in his holographic exploration, on the verge of a major discovery. Herbie continues to insist, and so Reed speaks binary and shuts him down. Good. One less distraction, Reed comments. That's when the messaging system beeps. Reed has missed a call. Analysis of the call indicates a person in distress. Assuming that it's his angry wife, Reed has the computer play the call, and it's Kathy's message. He seems to recognize the monkey's voice, maybe, or maybe just because the person has a threatening tone, Reed decides to help. Reed gives the computer a series of tasks to do, almost too fast for it to respond. Send the address of the call to the Fantasticar, undo the car moorings, launch the Fantasticar, pass the location and alert onto the rest of the Fantastic Four, and in that short span of time, Reed stretches outside. Then he's off, headed to ESU, which is where we go now. The Super Apes have tied Kathy up. Miklo and Peter are trashing Kathy's lab, while the Red Ghost pets a lab rabbit. Igor almost starts to tell Kathy what they're up to when a security guard bursts into the room. He orders the baboon to freeze, but Igor transforms his body into a sheet of copper. The guard's bullets bounce off harmlessly. Then he uses magnekinetics to yank the guard forward and into his grasp. This is all witnessed by Mr. Fantastic, who has snaked his way through the ventilation system. He notes that the Red Ghost appears to be less intelligent, while the apes have become more. This is strange, but he is able to devise a plan nonetheless. Peter and Miklo finish their work, having assembled some kind of device. They then open a set of doors, revealing 1,000 gallons of toxic nerve gas. They have been working here tirelessly, every night once the humans finished experimenting on their animal brethren. Now they will release the gas into the celebrating crowds of New Yorkers and have their revenge. A knocking at the door stops them. Unwilling to let anyone ruin this, Igor shapes his hand into a hammer. He'll get it. Once he opens the door, Mr. Fantastic's fist flies through, decking Igor. Miklo and Peter recognize that stretching ability and rush to the door. Mr. Fantastic cannot be allowed to stop them. But Mr. Fantastic isn't there. He's still in the vents. He had stretched his hand to the door. Now he bursts out of the vent, surprising the apes. They brawl for a couple pages, allowing the apes to demonstrate not only their newfound intelligence, but their powers as well. Peter seems to indicate that the changes in them are due to their own scientific experiments, which Mr. Fantastic finds intriguing. But he can't allow that to distract him from saving lives. He grabs the vent grate and smacks him upside the head. With Peter down, things are finally in hand. So, naturally, the rest of the Fantastic Four burst through the door and wall, eager to aid their teammate. But they find things pretty well over with. They begin to gather up our villains, unsettled at the new Red Ghost. Reed, however, is unsettled at the change itself. The Red Ghost and the apes were exposed to the same cosmic radiation as the Fantastic Four. If their powers have begun to change, and their minds fluctuate, is it possible that such a thing could happen to the Fantastic Four?
Dramatic reverb.
So this ended quickly, huh? A few punches from Reed Richards and the Super Apes are down. I like seeing Reed's tactics here as he distracts the apes before attacking them, and we don't get to see Reed's battlefield abilities too much, but come on,
No swearing.
fucking super-powered monkeys? How is that exciting or cool or interesting? And I know that monkeys or apes can be dangerous. I mean, you won't catch me pissing off a baboon. But in a world of single-celled assassins and invaders from another dimension, super apes just don't compare. I can appreciate Lobdell updating this older foe with some new twists. Kragoff's drop in intelligence and the apes' increase. The real threat here is why those changes occurred, and we have no answer for that. Reed hints that this may be a natural occurrence, and that it could threaten his family, and that is a bit nerve-wracking. I don't believe that this plotline ever goes anywhere, as Lobdell leaves the full writing duties with this issue, so that's a bit of a bummer. Before I talk about Lobdell's departure, though, we have one more scene to cover. We bounce to Tibet, where we meet Isabel and Gordon, a magazine reporter and a photographer, respectively. Isabel has finally, after 5 years of searching, found the very order of Tibetan monks who took in a young, wounded, bitter Victor Von Doom. They were the last group of people to see him before he became the dictator Dr. Doom, and as pacifists, Isabel is eager to see how they have dealt with that. The pair open the monastery doors and find the monks inside dead. Gordon starts snapping photos, and he suggests that they leave. Someone killed these men, and he doesn't want to risk joining them. Isabel agrees, but only after she has had a chance to look around. Look at this Scooby-Doo-ass reporter. In what world is this a good idea? Isabel eventually finds the monastery's forge, and it's still hot. Someone was using it recently. That someone then steps forward. They're clothed in red robes, but their faces hidden by shadow. Smoky blue energy leaks from his eyes while metal plates embedded in his forearms glisten in the light. He is Crucible, and he aims to test the world. Well, this comes out of nowhere. While Lobdell has done a good job utilizing classic Fantastic Four foes and introducing new ones, he really hasn't ever cliffhangered us with a new one, until now. And he's either hinting that Crucible is Dr. Doom, or he's trying to establish Crucible as a Doom-level threat. Keep in mind, Doom hasn't been seen since Heroes Reborn: The Return, or episode 1.13 of this podcast if you're interested, where Thor chucked him into a portal to battle for all of time. Could he have found a way out? What am I saying? Of course he could have. He's Dr.
No swearing.
Doom. But then, why the new armor? Maybe his solution cost him his armor, forcing him to seek sanctuary amongst these monks. But then why kill them? Why, to keep them from warning the world that its rightful ruler, Victor Von Doom, has returned. Bow before your one true master, you fools. Or we have a copycat who is attempting to follow in Doom's footsteps and gain a small shred of that awesomeness. A footnote promises that we'll find out more in issue 5, which is kind of weird. You don't normally have a comic book tell you what future issue you will need to buy in order to follow up on a plotline or a villain, but I think that editorial is trying to assuage fears over Claremont taking over the book with issue 4. They don't want us thinking that this plotline is going to get dropped, so they're assuring us that it won't be. Oh,
no swearing.
We have one more scene. My bad. We're back in Subterranea, where the Mole Man is finishing another relaxing bath. I guess there's not a lot to do in Subterranea other than take hot mineral baths. Ah, what a dream. The Mole Man demands that his minions attend him, but there is no response. He grabs his power staff and investigates a strange scratching sound. Doing so leads him to encounter something in the darkness. It's kept off camera from us. He had heard the legends of a monster crawling its way up from the Earth's core, one that planned to conquer the surface. And it's welcome to it, he says, so long as he has his underground kingdom. But he will fight in order to protect his people. And now, finally, issue 3 ends. I like Mole Man's weird love for the Moloids. Like, he's a total jerk to them, treating them like servants or slaves, but he really does put their needs and existence above those of humanity. I ain't saying that makes him a good guy, I'm just saying that he has layers. Having finished issue 3, we now close out this entire creative team. Lobdell gives way to Claremont, while David and Farmer make way for LaRocca and Thibert. And I can't find a reason why. Most of the return books have authors who stay on them for a number of years. Mark Waid was on Captain America for 2 years, while Kurt Busiek wrote Iron Man for roughly 2, and The Avengers for 5 years. So why is Lobdell leaving the Fantastic Four so soon? Given the lack of answers that I can find, I am left to guess. And my guess is that it was the plan to begin with. Lobdell has a long history as a fill-in writer, and I don't mean that as a way to demean his writing by any means. Throughout the 90s, when the writer of an X title would leave their book, Lobdell often ducked in and wrote that book for a couple months, then ducked back out when Marvel hired a new creative team. Outside of X-Men, Wolverine, and X-Force, I believe that Lobdell wrote for every ongoing series in the 90s at some point or another. He is adaptable, he is fast, and he's cool with telling these kinds of stories. So, perhaps the book launched or was about to launch, and Lobdell wanted to write it but had to drop out for some reason. I think that it's more likely, however, that Marvel couldn't get new author Chris Claremont on board the book in time. So, they contracted Lobdell for a few months, he pitched up to 5 issues and ended up fully writing 3. Then, once Claremont was able to write, he took over the scripting duties, or he was given those duties, in order to transition the book from Lobdell to his writing style. We can tell that Claremont and LaRocca's arrival was planned due to the publishing side of things. Comic books are solicited 3 months before their release, so issue 4 would have been solicited to comic stores around the time that issue 1 was published. Claremont and LaRocca would have already begun working on issue 4 before issues 2 and 3 were even released to the public. There was clearly a plan here, and I feel like we can start to see the edges of that plan coming together, but we aren't getting the full picture, and we may never get that picture. But why would Marvel bring on Chris Claremont? Well, remember, this is a return to the feel of old-school comic books. Wade, Busick, and Claremont are old pros at comic writing and are able to instill a timelessness in their books while telling compelling stories. Claremont goes way back, having written comics since the 70s. Combine that with his love of science fiction and his legendary resume, and he's kind of a natural fit for the Fantastic Four. So let's get into it. Issue 4 is double-sized, so I'm going to need to move fast on this one. Lobdell plotted it, Claremont scripted it, LaRocca drew it, Art Thibert inked it, and Steve Oliff colored it. Enough
No swearing.
setup, let's go! Ben Grimm stands on the balcony of the pier, stretching and enjoying the New Year's sun. Billy, their male person, who reveals her name to be Wilhelmina Lumpkin, niece of Willie Lumpkin, who was the male person of the Fantastic Four for years. Again, this is a modern take on a classic Fantastic Four staple. I like this. Billy's delivering their mail when a bright flash of cosmic energy blinds her and Ben Grimm both, and Ben knows that it came from Four Freedoms Plaza. He hops on a sky cycle, which is exactly what it sounds like, a floating motorcycle, and calls the rest of the Fantastic Four. He reports to Reed as he approaches, keeping his old friend informed of what he's seeing and what they can expect when they get there. As he approaches the white energy, it begins to fade away, revealing the Silver Surfer and Ben Grimm's old girlfriend, Alicia Masters. There is a moment of awkwardness between the two of them. Ben is hurt by Alicia having appeared to move on, but he is also vaguely mature enough to understand why she has. He tries to focus on the Surfer and his problems instead, who appears drained as he leans heavily on Alicia. Alicia isn't sure what's wrong with him. Some kind of attack blindsided the Surfer. It was almost enough for him to drop his personal atmosphere, which would have meant Alicia's death when they were in the vacuum of space. The Surfer spoke briefly about some kind of threat inside of Earth, too, before they arrived. Ben scoops up the Surfer as the Fantasticar approaches. Reed'll figure this out, Ben assures her. He always does. Reed is delayed, as the Fantasticar is suddenly beset by a cascading virus. It is dropping like a rock. While Mr. Fantastic struggles with the controls, the Torch has his sister throw up a force field around Ben and their guests. He then blasts the roof with heat, melting the tar, which then catches and holds fast to the Fantasticar. Once they stop moving, he then creates an updraft vacuum, drawing the heat away. Ben passes the Surfer to Reed while Sue and Alicia greet each other. Ben asks Reed, "What just happened? The Fantasticar checked out fine yesterday when he did maintenance on it." And Shockingly, Reed has no idea. So holy fuck,
No swearing.
y'all. The difference in tone here is head swiveling. The overall story beats Reed well, don't get me wrong, but I am cutting out so much narration, stiff dialogue, and just long-winded expository monologues. Claremont is an author who is known to use 500 words when 5 would have worked, and holy jeez, dude, is that on display here. And it's even more awkward here because a lot of the characters say what they're doing, which is another Claremont staple, but I can't help but feel that a narration box would have served him better. They would have filled us in on the things that we need to know, but kept the cast from sounding like they are living narration boxes. When Ben and Alicia meet and Claremont has to establish their history, both of them give these long speeches that are very heavy-handed and very dramatic, and they just don't sound like people speak. They don't feel like two people who are struggling with their emotions at seeing an old love. They feel like reference manuals, and that is a shame for such a solid and compelling story beat. It was nice to see a confident, competent Human Torch, though. He acts swiftly when the car starts to fall, and he has total control of his powers. Claremont likes to play with the powers of his cast, examining them scientifically, and then putting them to new and inventive uses. This version of the Human Torch feels much more in line with Tom DeFalco's Human Torch from where we left Volume 1, as opposed to Lobdell's more juvenile take on the character. But having him narrate what he's doing still feels out of character. On the one hand, this torch feels more like that overall kind of broad image of what the Human Torch should be after years of adventuring, but on the other hand, he now feels uneven as his tone and his voice have changed so drastically under Claremont's pen. We then get a 2-page, 10-panel, 43-word balloon scene to tell us that Crucible has captured Gordon and Isabel, gotten them aboard a plane, and that they are now on their way to somewhere where Crucible shall, let's say it again, test the world. Great. What a waste of page. Like, as the B-plot to issue 4 and A-plot to issue 5, I get that we need to check in on these characters. But there is so much information in these scenes that we don't need. Like Isabel talking about how singular and old the plane that they're in is. This adds nothing to the story that's being told. It is just a factual statement. We should have just jumped in, confirmed that Crucible has captives and is on the move, and then jumped back out. A single page, and we'd have been done with this scene. This is going to be a long read, isn't it? The Fantastic Four, plus Alicia, climb into another aircraft and are now following the Surfer as he makes his way from New York to Canada. Claremont takes this time to check in on everyone, which is smart. Ben and Alicia start to chat about their relationship, and Sue makes up some excuse to check on Reed in the cockpit. She tells him that as much as she loves being a member of the Fantastic Four, her responsibility should lie with her son, not the team. The conversation between Ben and Alicia continues then, with Ben asking if the Surfer reciprocates her feelings, and she doesn't know yet. Outside, the Human Torch asks the Surfer basically the same thing, concerned about his friend Ben Grimm. The Surfer doesn't see how it's any of his business, though, and suddenly streaks to the ground below. The Torch follows after, unhappy about being blown off, but they've reached their destination. Reed informs us that we are in Yorktown, Saskatchewan, and no one seems to care. But before we move on, that scene was garbage. And not just because of stiff, unenjoyable dialogue, which is definitely there, but because the characters just feel wrong. Ben is the pilot of the Fantastic Four. This is a long-established part of the character. It's why he was on that fateful rocket trip that they took so many years ago, and later on in this very issue, Ben is going to reference his experience flying. If the Fantastic Four are going somewhere, and Ben's kind of ex was on board that flight, he would totally volunteer to pilot, thus dodging any discussion about their relationship inside of the duty of flying the craft. I can see that scene. Ben would be flying, Alicia would start to talk to him, and Ben would coldly say that he can't talk, he has to keep track of the Silver Surfer, they'll talk later. Alicia would then sit down next to Sue, and they would then talk about how Alicia feels without settling anything. Ben's dialogue throughout this issue seems to indicate that he knows that Alicia is over him. She loves him, sure, but she isn't in love with him anymore. And as much as that hurts him, Ben won't hold her back either. So why have this conversation with Ben? All it establishes is that Alicia isn't sure if the Surfer loves her back. And while there is a very small part of me that likes these two ex-lovers openly discussing one of their new relationships honestly and with respect for each other, that isn't a conversation that needs to happen with Ben right now. Then we have the Reed and Sue thing. Initially, Sue volunteers to bring Reed some coffee, politely excusing herself from Ben and Alicia's conversation. I thought that she was just giving them some space, but no, she ends up talking to Reed about maybe quitting the Fantastic Four, and just... what? Why? Where does this come from? The Fantastic Four have had Franklin for like 15 publication years at this point. How has Sue not reconciled this yet? And why is she thinking about this now? There's no cause for it. I'd have even bought we just had our home attacked by a single-celled assassin, I need to be protecting our son, although I think that's weak, and the Iconoclast was trying to kill Sue, so it's not like being there to protect Franklin would have actually done anything, but still, we don't have a reason. I do know that we have a new author on this book, and that he is finding his voice and his plots for these characters, and Sue is very much the mom of the Fantastic Four, and he is having her fall further into that role. But this is not the way to do it. Honestly, this scene just shouldn't be here. Sue should have excused herself from Ben and Alicia's conversation, and then if we're going to have that conversation, Ben and Alicia should have just finished it. And then we move outside to the Human Torch and Silver Surfer's discussion. End of transition. Reed and Sue don't need a scene here, and we don't need to waste the page that takes up this space. Finally, we have the Silver Surfer and the Human Torch scene. This is actually the only one that works for me. I'll admit, at first I was annoyed by it, as the Surfer waxes poetically about his lonely soul and his maybe love for Alicia, and really, who honestly does that? But then I started to complain about it while I was writing, and honestly, I just found that it works. The Surfer has spent so much time by himself in space in a vacuum that he probably would talk to himself. There is certainly narration boxes that reflect the Surfer's inner thoughts, so I could see this kind of being a variant on that idea. It just so happens that the Human Torch is flying around him when he does this, and when the Human Torch presses him on his feelings, he closes up. And this makes sense too. Again, the Surfer is much more used to being alone than with others, and those others that he has spent a lot of time with in space, he trusts, but that kind of person isn't the Human Torch. The Surfer definitely wouldn't care to open up to an alien that he has little to no relationship with, so he doesn't. I also like Johnny being concerned for Ben's feelings, which fits with their relationship as shown in issue 2, so that is decently consistent between these issues and these two runs. So we land in Yorktown and no one bats an eye. Even Sergeant Grey of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police isn't flustered by the arrival of the Fantastic Four. Sue and Reed talk to him, while Ben and Johnny watch the Surfer move about the town. Now that he's landed, he just seems lost. Ben explains that it must be like flying over a radio beacon. From a distance, you can tell exactly where you need to go, but once you're over the signal, you can't quite find it anymore. Whatever they're looking for, they must be at ground zero. Exiting a nearby church, the Mole Man declares that Ben is right, but as the Fantastic Four brace for a fight, the Mole Man offers none. He says that he is a man of peace, so long as his subjects go unharmed. He is not the threat here. The Thing, who knows what it means to be judged as a monster, is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and listen to his explanation. The Mole Man escorts them inside, save for Sergeant Gray, who goes to call his constables. The Torch warns Ben before they go inside that this is a trap, bro. But Ben disagrees. Just look at the Mole Man. There's no pride or arrogance left in him right now. He's tired, and what's more, he is scared. Inside the church, over 200 moloids are gathered. Their skin is mottled and burned, the environment of the surface world poisonous to them. Many are stretched out on pews covered in blankets, and they do their best to comfort each other. The Mole Man explains that these handful are the few who escaped the fate of their fellows, and they are counting on him to set things right. The Fantastic Four sympathize immediately. Reed believes that he can build a device that will create a better environment to keep the moloids in to at least ease their suffering. Once that's done, they can then turn their attention to whoever did this. But whoever did this reveals himself as he tears the roof off of the church. The massive form of Terminus towers over them. And this throws the Fantastic Four, as last they knew, Terminus was dead. But he is clearly not, and Ben explains his basic deal to the Silver Surfer. Terminus is an alien who travels space, trashing planets and stripping them of resources. And, disturbingly, the body of Terminus is constructed out of billions of moloids. And here we're hit with, I think it's the one thing that Claremont actually doesn't tell us, and that's how Terminus works. And I am honestly pretty unfamiliar with Terminus myself, having only read him, I believe, in one Uncanny X-Men annual from the late 80s, so I had to do some research on the character. Terminus is actually a microbe. Once it has landed on a planet, that microbe is then ingested by the planet's inhabitants. Those inhabitants then turn into robot versions of themselves. I can't believe this is real. Like, someone actually came up with this stupid idea. So, they turn into robot versions of themselves, and then they eat radioactive material. They then use that energy to grow big and strong, and then those strong robots merge together, thus creating a Terminus. But not this Terminus. According to the Marvel Wiki, this particular Terminus began life as a mental virus, which is why the moloids have formed its body instead of becoming radioactive eating robots. You know, like, I love comic books. I love them because they can be stupid as all get out and high art at the exact same time. But sometimes they're just stupid. And I think today is one of those days. So the Fantastic Four can't physically attack Terminus because then they'll be hurting the moloids who they want to save. But they can't just leave the moloids to their fate either. So first they help Yorktown evacuate. And wait a minute. Did Yorktown not know that a subterranean race was squatting in their church? This is the most chill town in the entire world. Like, at this point I feel like there is something up with Yorktown. Even in the story, Johnny points out how unimpressed the citizens are with all of this weirdness, and Ben just brushes it off as Canadians being polite, but like, really? Really? This is just... I don't even know what this is supposed to be. So screw it, they evacuate Yorktown. The Silver Surfer is still frustrated by all of this, though. Despite having found Terminus, his senses are still reeling, his body weak, and he doesn't understand why. Ben helps support him and offers his thoughts. The power cosmic that fuels the Surfer comes from Galactus, who in turn feeds on worlds. So the power cosmic is fueled by life, as that is where it's derived from. But Terminus enslaves life and twists it to his will. He guesses that the Surfer can feel the pain of those moloids as they're enslaved and then brought to the surface. Remember, the surface world hurts them, so they are literally dying so that Terminus can live, and eventually he will need new bodies to replace those. Then, it'll be humanity's turn. With no good solution presenting itself, and Mr. Fantastic shockingly useless, the Fantastic Four just try some good old punching. The Human Torch charges at Terminus, but he just bounces off of the big guy's chest armor. Mr. Fantastic, who is busy pulling Alicia out of the way, can't cushion the torch's impact. But that's okay. The torch focuses on expelling his heat from his back, kinda like a launched rocket, and he burns through the street instead of splatting on it. This act drains him, though, and his flame fades as he falls into an underground cavern and lands in a pool of water. His mind tells him to get up before he drowns, but his body is just not responding. Thankfully, a shadowy figure pulls him out. Johnny asks who they are, but the figure doesn't introduce themselves. They just leave. On the surface, though, the Thing crashes Terminus' party the only way that he knows how. With his fists. Punching the Moloids might hurt them, sure, but that's better than them dying up here. He slams through one of Terminus' arms, scattering the Moloids' bodies, but they are still controlled by Terminus' will, so they immediately start to clamber over each other in order to become an arm again. Mr. Fantastic jumps in here, corralling the freed Moloids with his own body. The downside of discorporating Terminus' body is that it's not going to stop him. So long as the Moloids are infected, Terminus can just pull itself back together at any time. In the cavern, where Terminus' legs are dangling, the Moloids are starting to break up as well, although they fight to stay as legs. Having rested, the Human Torch lights up again and creates flame walls, pinning them in as well. Breaking up Terminus' body is great. But what do they do now? The Surfer has a thought. Since Terminus is able to affect him, perhaps he can affect Terminus. He climbs on top of Terminus' chest armor and, using his power cosmic, the Surfer reaches out to the Moloids. They don't want to be part of Terminus, and so long as the spark of rebellion exists within their hearts, the Surfer will fan it to a flame. He pours energy out, hoping to clear the Moloids of Terminus' infection and restore their freedom. Alicia curses her blindness, unable to see what's going on. The Mole Man can see, though, and he is touched by it. In his own way, he misused and mistreated the Moloids, using them to enact his own plans. Much like Terminus. Alicia says that so long as the Mole Man is alive, then he can choose to be better. There's still time to set things right. He isn't so sure of that. It's taking all of the Fantastic Four just to keep Terminus in place, and the Surfer is beginning to falter. Soon, he will fail. Alicia won't let that happen. There's a pattern to what the Surfer must do, and he needs her to see it. She rushes into the blinding energy, and eventually a massive explosion builds. Mr. Fantastic has the Invisible Woman throw up a shield, protecting them all, and eventually the world settles back down. Alicia and the Silver Surfer are unharmed. Terminus is gone, burned out of the now freed Moloids. The Underdwellers celebrate, tossing the Mole Man into the air as if he did the deed himself. And Ben smiles at Alicia. She rushed to the Silver Surfer's aid, as if he was the most important thing in the world to her, without a thought to her own safety. He goes to her and hugs her, telling her that no matter what, he will always be her friend. So long as she's happy, then he's happy for her. I'm not gonna lie to you folks, I kinda hate this issue. There's just so much exposition, and the characters don't have their voices down yet, and there are just so many characters here. Is this a Ben Grimm story, as the opening and closing with him would lead me to believe? Is this a Mole Man story where he learns to be a better person? Or is this a Silver Surfer story tying into or out of his own comic? I actually checked the Silver Surfer issues that were published around this time, and issue 138 does follow up on this issue, and it forces Alicia to choose between Ben and the Surfer. Don't worry, I'm not getting it for this collection. Ben's story has been told, and it is one of his acceptance of Alicia's decision. But Ben, you ask, why couldn't Claremont tell all three of these stories as he just did? And it's because we have so many stories happening here that none of them are interesting. The focus is all over the place, and this issue is so slow, and it's so long, it is double-sized, y'all, and it's just twice the pain. Terminus, a story, which is really one of a singular individual enslaving the will of others, doesn't tie into the relationship story at all. Ben would have needed to demand Alicia back upon her return, expecting that the status quo be restored upon her arrival, despite how she felt about the surfer, and then after facing Terminus, Ben would have learned the lesson about letting a person go and self-governance. But that totally makes Ben feel like an a-hole, and I wouldn't want that, and Claremont clearly didn't want that either. That means that the Mole Man is the only one who comes out of this issue changed, but who cares about the Mole Man? He isn't a cast member of this book, nor does he become one, nor does the status quo of Subterranea play into the rest of Claremont's run. If the Mole Man did learn to treat his subjects better, we don't follow up on it at all, so it makes this story feel even less important. When I was writing this episode and I flipped over my comics and I saw this cover, I literally shuddered. I groaned in pain. This is a bad comic. The series does get better, I assure you. I really enjoyed Claremont's overall run. These are growing pains, and while Claremont does eventually find his voice and the type of stories that he wants to tell, this sure does hurt right now. Next week, we have better issues on the way as I break down Fantastic Four Volume 3, Issues 5 and 6. In Issue 5, Reed and Ben journey to Sweden for a scientific symposium, but they find a new threat as Crucible puts Reed to the test. Then, in Issue 6, our spotlight shifts to Sue Richards as she trains, flirts, and dances the day away, unaware that the TechNet has been hired to take her son. Join me next week for episode 12.3, New Foes, Old Flames.
Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.